Welcome to my February garden tour. As you can see, the garden is a little bit messy. One of these months, I'm gonna be able to do a garden tour and have it be spick and span, but not this month. So let's get started. The pot that you see right there is still empty. It's going to host some coral vine. The transplants are ready to go. I just need to fill it up with soil, and I've been so busy, I haven't been able to mix it up. And then next to it, we have an empty pot. So here I used to have my raspberry plants, but those have moved because I am going to be planting an avocado here. This variety is called the Fuerte Avocado. That one's very cold hardy. I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth whenever I plant it, but I'm actually waiting on an order of 25-gallon pots from the Greenhouse Mega Store. I get a lot of questions about where I buy my nursery pots, and that's my go-to place just because I feel like that's where I can find them the most affordable. They do require quite a bit of soil, so keep that in mind in case you want to plant things in pots. But the good thing is the roots of the trees have a lot more insulation because they can hold more soil, and I don't have to up-pot them quite as often. I personally don't like to up-pot trees slowly because I feel like it just takes too much time. I would have an excess amount of pots, and with the amount of trees that I have, it would be so time consuming. So I go straight for a big pot. That way I don't have to water as often, I don't have to feed as often, and the trees seem to be really happy. And I have checked the roots on some of them when I've repotted them, because at one point I planted them too low, and when I repotted them, their roots had filled out the entire pot within 1 year. Some of them even less than a year. So I'm not concerned about it being too big for the roots of the trees. They fill out very quickly if you give them the right amount of nutrients and you water them properly. So that's my preference, but everybody has their own style of gardening. That's just how I like to grow my trees here in the low desert. Next to the avocado, we have a fruit punch mango. This is the only mango tree that I have in my garden. Maybe someday I'll pick up a few more. There's so many different varieties and they're all delicious and unique in their own way. But I wanted to start out with one, and honestly, my husband is the one that pushed me to buy this mango tree because I was very intimidated. Tropicals still intimidate me because we live in the desert and they're not as easy to grow as, say, citrus. They require a lot more attention, a proper microclimate, all of the stuff that you really don't have to think about whenever you're planting other things that do well here in the desert. The same goes for my avocado. I've been wanting to pick some up for months now, but I always chickened out, and finally I went ahead and actually purchased two. You'll see the other one later on. But this is what the fruit punch mango looks like this month. It's filling out so beautifully, and the tropicals are going to be right next to each other. We have the mango, the avocado, the loquat right behind that. Their foliage shields each other. They get a lot of morning sun, afternoon shade, and they look beautiful and happy where they are right now. I mean, look at this fruit punch mango. It's filling out so nicely. You can see a lot of new growth. It hasn't tried flowering yet, which I'm happy about because I don't want it to flower for a few more years. Next to that, I have a pineapple guava. For the longest time, I was scared that I might need a second variety to cross-pollinate, and I could still get more fruit set if I did have a second variety. But this one is a Coolidge pineapple guava, which is supposed to be self-pollinating. A lot of the other varieties aren't, so keep that in mind. And also there's some varieties that are more ornamental than anything else. But I really love this tree. I think the leaves on it are beautiful. You can see the contrast of the color between those and the mango and also the citrus. They're a lot lighter. They're more of a minty green. It hasn't tried flowering yet, but I feel like it was still very young. So hopefully we get some flowers this year. If not, maybe next year. But it's still pushing out new growth, which is a really good sign, and I hope that it really takes off this year. Previously, I had it in a different location, and while I did well, it was in full sun all day, every day, and I feel like here it's gonna have a nicer microclimate, and hopefully that'll encourage it to grow faster and produce some really good fruits. Next to that, I have my bear's lime tree. This is one of the original trees from the garden. For some reason, I feel like it looks a little bit balder than it did last month. That might just be me though. The one good thing about it is that there's blooms everywhere, as you can see there. So we are going to get some fruit set, and I am going to let it fruit this year. We also have some beautiful new growth popping up right here. It was repotted a few weeks ago because I had buried it way too deep when I first planted it over a year ago. And it was surviving, but it wasn't thriving. And after I repotted it and raised it up a little bit more, it really started taking off, which makes me very happy because for a second there I thought I wasn't going to make it. Next to that, I have an iceberg rose, and it looks really bald right now because I cut it back a few weeks ago, but it's already starting to push out new growth, as you can see right here. The reason I cut it back is because I wanted to give it a nicer shape. At first I was going to transplant it into a bigger pot, but then I realized it hasn't really outgrown this one, and all it needed was to be cut back a little bit more because it was going all over the place. And come spring, I really wanted to fill out and put on some gorgeous blooms. Next to that, I have a bougainvillea, as you can see right there. It's hanging in there. The leaves look a little bit distraught, but we have had some really cold days and we have a few more lighter frosts happening at the end of this week. So I feel like after we're past that, it'll really start taking off. It's just had a little bit of a hit, but for the most part, it's still hanging in there. And I see one bloom at the very top. It seems that it doesn't want to bloom anywhere else right now, but if I come in closer, it's still growing, as you can see there. I think it's just a little bit too cold for it right now. And this is what the arbor looks like. Hopefully by the end of this year, it will be filled with a ton of blooms. And I need to take that bamboo stick down. I forgot why we had it there. On the other side of the arbor, we have another iceberg rose along with some star jasmine, which has really started taking off. And I'm obsessed with the way it wraps itself around the arbor. I feel like with this vine, I really don't have to do anything. With the bougainvillea, I have to make sure to keep attaching it every couple of weeks during the spring and summer, but with this one, it does it on its own, which I really appreciate. And it looks beautiful. When I first bought these two plants, they were the tiniest size I could find. The ones that are like $8, because they didn't have that many leaves, they weren't that tall, and all it takes is a little bit of patience. And that's how I'm able to fill my garden so much, is I always buy the cheapest plants, the smallest plants, and then I just wait for them to fill out on their own once they've been planted in my garden. Here we have my clementine tree. And as you can see, it has put on so much growth. This tree is really taking off. For the longest time, this tree was sort of stunted, and it was for the same reason that my bear's lime tree was struggling. And that's because it was planted far too deep. So the day that I repotted my bear's lime, I also repotted this one and raised it up a few inches. Since then, it's been so happy. I made sure the soil was nice, loamy, and well draining. And look at all that new growth that's pushed out. And it also has a ton of blooms, which makes me very excited because I cannot wait for my kids to pick clementines from here. The pot next to it is empty because it's going to house my yellow hawk plum, or Spondias mombin. In the next month, I hope to get the red variety as well. But in the meantime, the yellow variety will go right here. That's a 25-gallon pot. The only reason I haven't transplanted it out is because we still have 2 more days where it's going to get really cold. It's going to dip down into the low 30s, and the nursery recommended to keep it indoors until it's well above 40 degrees. Next to that is a pink tropic guava, and this one has put on so much growth. Like I said earlier, I always go for the smallest tree size because it's more inexpensive, and I feel like they adapt better because they're so young. They're not really set in their ways. They're not really root bound. And this one has taken off like crazy. It's less than a year old and it looks beautiful. So now we're gonna enter the garden. And I think we'll do the edges first. So over on this corner, we have a red Malaysian guava. And this one I picked because I've heard so many great things about it. Not only is it ornamental, the leaves are a beautiful burgundy color, but the fruit itself is also very ornamental. And I feel like there's no bad tasting guava. I love guava. It's one of my favorite fruit, which is why I wanted to have several varieties in my garden. And I'm obsessed with this one. It's still very young. You can see the trunk is not very wide. It's like less than the width of a pencil, but it'll fill out soon, and all we have to do is be patient. I don't expect it to fruit this year, but if it does try, I won't allow it to until next year. By the way, when I had it in its nursery pot, it was drying out very fast, and then I transplanted it to help insulate the roots during the colder nights. And it's put out so much more growth in the past few weeks, which makes me so excited. And look how gorgeous that looks. I think it's one of the prettiest trees I have. Next to that, we have a planter with a ton of peas and a couple of transplants over here. This one is a tomato. The reason I place a tomato there is because eventually, once the peas die back, I want the tomato to take over this entire planter. I might pop a few other things in there, but that way I can go ahead and trellis it up and give it some support without having to make any additional trellises. Here I have one of my fig trees, which is starting to leaf out, as you can see right there. It has a lot of swollen buds and it looks beautiful. It'll look a lot better in a few weeks though. Next to it, I have this really long planter full of cabbage, some celery, some peas, and this trellis that I made that I need to fix up a little bit. I plan on replacing those wires with some metal wire and some bamboo sticks to give it a little bit more support and make it more permanent. But so far it's been working really great. So I want to show you this real quick. The celery that I have here isn't just celery, it's pink celery. Look at that. I want to go in and cover it up to help blanch it so that it has the best flavor possible, and then I plan on making ceviche or cóctel de camarón with it. And then next to it over here, I wanted to show you this because hopefully next month it looks a lot bigger and better, but that is a little cucamelon. I had transplanted some over and they didn't make it. And in a previous video, I thought that wasn't a cucamelon, but I'm pretty sure it is now. And I really hope it grows because I've been trying to grow them for the longest time and I never have really good luck with them. And the same thing is happening over here. Look how tiny it is. Hopefully it takes off because I want the entire trellis to be covered with cucumber melons. I think that would look magical. Their leaves are so tiny and delicate. I think it would really add whimsy to the garden. Please excuse the pathway. I was taking things out yesterday and I haven't had a chance to clean up. But over here I have another fig tree and this one looks amazing. It has so many leaves already. It's one of the earliest varieties that woke up. So far, not only does it have leaves, but it also has some fruit right there. Hold on, let me turn you around. Hey there, buddy. I just wanted to show you guys my little friend really fast. Aren't they so beautiful? I get to experience this every single day, which is one of the main reasons I love gardening. This is another planter that houses a bunch of peas, and I had direct sowed a couple of alpine strawberries. I'm not sure if they made it though. And I also transplanted out, what is that? A pepper. And I think, wait, did I transplant an eggplant? Oh, and an eggplant as well so that I could train them to go up the trellis. They look okay so far. The alpine strawberries haven't really made it, which I'm not too surprised about. I haven't had the best luck with them. I feel like with those, you really need to start them indoors, but every time I try, they only make it a few weeks and then they die on me. So if you guys have any tips on growing alpine strawberries from seed, please let me know. Because so far, I feel like I have better luck with bare root strawberries. I have two varieties growing right now, the Quinault and, oh, I forget the second one. But I feel like those are a lot easier to look after and they're cheaper because I wind up spending so much money on the seeds, and if I can't get them to germinate, then that's just money that I've thrown away. So if you guys have tips, please let me know because I've heard so many great things about alpine strawberries, but I've never tasted one before. In this corner, I have some epazote and it looks beautiful. It's starting to come back. I bought the seeds off Etsy. I started a few and they just weren't taking. So I dumped the whole packet in a little tray one day. Some of them finally started growing. Then I transplanted them out here. And I forgot to buy more seeds for this year, but then I read online that they're actually a perennial. And it's starting to come back, which makes me very happy. So this year, I hope to save a lot of epazote seeds because it's one of the herbs that we use the most in the kitchen. I'm gonna step back a little bit, but in this planter, we have this beautiful trellis. I already have a video up on how I made this. And then down here, I have planted some peppers, cabbage, squash, and another pepper, and then a few herbs sprinkled throughout. So the squash I actually transplanted a few weeks ago and it looks like it's gonna start trying to produce, which makes me very happy because squash is one of my favorite things to pick from the garden. In the past few months, my family has started warming up to it, but before that, they never ate the squash, which is crazy to me because I grew up loving squash. Calabacitas were life. This one is a, wait, what? Buttercup squash. Here I have a Parfianca pomegranate, and for the longest time this tree would not wake up and I kept coming out here to check it every single day. And finally, I'm starting to see some leaves pop out, which is awesome because I love this tree. This year it should produce. Last year it wanted to produce as well, but it was so young that I didn't allow it to. And this year I cannot wait to have pomegranates covering these arches. So I plan to train it going that way and going this way as well. In this planter, I have some more celery, peppers, kale, squash, and then some more peppers. As you can see, the peppers are already breaking dormancy and starting to wake up, which is awesome because that means they're going to start producing a lot faster than the peppers that I started from seed a few months ago. And if you live in a warmer zone, that's one of the greatest advantages we have is we can overwinter a lot of stuff. Here I have another fig tree. This one has not woken up yet. I believe there might be a little bit of swelling on the buds. Hardly though. In this planter I have some more peppers, some garlic. That garlic was actually planted from store-bought garlic. I was trying to do an experiment and right now it looks pretty incredible. We'll have to see how big the bulbs get though. Next to it I have some fairy tale eggplant that is starting to bloom. It looks beautiful and I also plan to train it to go up the trellis. Next to it I have a tropic white guava. This is one of my original guava trees and one of the first tropicals I planted in the yard. I was actually holding out for the longest time to try and pick up a Mexican cream guava, but I wasn't able to find one locally. There is one nursery that I called that has them in stock, but I'm gonna wait a few more weeks before picking one up. But that's a variety that I'm super excited to try. I've heard a lot of good things about this variety as well though, and the tree has really taken off, as you can see there. I've cut it back a few times and then finally decided to start training it flat against the wall just because I didn't want it to cover up the pathway, and they can get really bushy if you allow them to. So I wanted to grow a little bit flatter, and I'm gonna let it get a little bit taller as well. In the pots next to it, I have some eggplants, some parsley. This pot housed a contender peach, but that variety does not do well here in Arizona because it requires way more chill hours. So I cut it back and tried grafting a scion of my Florida Prince peach, and hopefully that takes off. If it does, eventually I'll graft a portion of my Desert Gold peach onto this one, so it'll have two varieties in one. A few weeks ago, I talked about how I had direct sowed some peas in here, and then I forgot to water them, so they didn't really come up. And then I re-sowed again, and now I have several of them popping up, which is really cool. And they're gonna start climbing up this DIY grape trellis. I have a lot more fig trees here. This pathway is pretty much lined with fig trees. I feel like half of my fig trees have woken up and the other half are still hanging in there, not making up their mind yet, which is fine. I'm pretty sure they'll start leafing out within the next few weeks. As you can see there, more eggplant, more fig trees, and then the ones here on the end are starting to wake up a lot more because they have growth at the bottom and a lot more growth at the top. Ooh, and the same goes for this one. And this one. What I'm most excited for is a breva crop. Let's head back. Here I have some aloe vera, which looks a little bit sad. This is the first time that I noticed it looking extra sad. I think it might be because of the cooler days we've been having. So I'm gonna see if it bounces back. I don't really do anything to this aloe vera plant because every time I do, it ends up looking like this. So this is not my doing. I think this is just due to the weather. Next to that, I have some basil that reseeded itself, some cabbage, a bunch of cilantro, and then my Frederick passion fruit vine, which looks beautiful. I'm trying to propagate some right now because I want at least one more vine somewhere where it gets full sun to see how well it grows compared to this one, because this one gets morning sun, afternoon shade. The rest of this planter is filled with herbs, a lot of which have reseeded themselves, and also some garlic. All this garlic that you see here has either been store-bought or it came from my sister-in-law's father-in-law. One new exciting addition though is these strawberry plants. I bought them as bare roots on Amazon and they took off really fast. I also bought a pack of them from Home Depot, and those were kind of hit and miss. A couple of them have started waking up, but most of them are not really showing signs of life, so hopefully that changes. But I had really good luck with these Amazon ones. That's my daughter's fairy garden, and this pineapple looks so sad. It has some damage, and I think that's due to the frost. This is one of those plants that's very low maintenance for me. I don't have to do very much, and it only started looking like this after we had a couple of days of light frost. Next to that, I have my sunshine blueberry plant, and this plant looks incredible. First, I was certain that I could not grow blueberries in the desert, but this plant has proved me wrong, and it's honestly not that difficult. The only thing to keep in mind is you cannot put them in ground. We have really alkaline soil here. Blueberries like really acidic soil. I already have a video up on how I feed them and how I take care of them. So far, it's been loving this location, and it's a little over a year old. I know that in the future, if I were to plant a second variety, maybe I would get a lot more fruit set, and I might do that. But for right now, I'm really happy with this variety. It requires low chill hours, and it doesn't require as acidic of a soil, but I still try and make sure it's very acidic just to keep it nice and happy. And look at those blooms. Isn't it so pretty? It already has some fruit starting to ripen over on this branch, and then a couple more fruits setting everywhere else. Next to it, I have my gold nugget loquat. I have wanted this tree for so long. I did so much research on what the best loquat variety is, and a lot of people had really good things to say about this one. It's been growing really well. In the past few days, it's had a couple of yellow leaves, but they were the older leaves, and it's kept pushing out new growth, so I'm not really worried about it. And I think that's it for the borders of the garden. Now I'm gonna go over the garden beds before the sun goes down. So in this first one, I have some eggplant, which is already starting to produce. Let me show you. There's one right there and another one right here. I'm so happy to be able to harvest them soon. Next to that, I have some garlic, a pepper that is bouncing back. I have a couple of garlic sprinkled throughout, some peas, and some basil that's starting to flower. I'm leaving the basil in for now because the bees really like it, and I want as many bees in the garden as possible. If you want really good fruit set in your garden, you want to have as many pollinators as possible, and one thing that I really have to work on is planting enough flowers for the pollinators. I was supposed to start flowers a few weeks ago. I never got around to it, so recently I've been going around and sprinkling zinnia seeds everywhere. And if any plants are bolting, I try and leave them there for a few weeks just to bring the pollinators in, because I didn't do what I was supposed to. So in the next few weeks, I'm going to be direct sowing a few more flower seeds, and I just tuck them anywhere there's space because I want to draw in all of the bees. Over here, I have some tomatoes that I planted along with some Calabrese broccoli that is going to be coming out soon. They haven't started forming heads, and I've left them in for now because especially during the cooler nights, I feel like they help protect the tomatoes so that they don't get as damaged. As you can see right here, they sort of shield them so that the tomatoes can really acclimate, and then once it starts warming up, the broccoli will come out and the tomatoes will be able to take off without having to fight for space. On the edge of this bed, I also have a few root vegetables. In the bed next to it, I have a huge tomato tomato, which has already reached the top again. I recently tied it back a few days ago, and it's growing way too fast for me to keep up, so I think I'm gonna top it and keep it at that height. Otherwise, I won't be able to harvest the tomatoes. Underneath it, we have some broccoli, which is gonna come out soon because the heads are forming like this. They're not very big. They're already starting to separate, which means that they're going to bolt. So I'll leave them in just a little bit longer for the pollinators, and then they'll come out. I also have some more peas, and look at this nasturtium. It took off like crazy, and it has some beautiful blooms on it too. Look at that. I also have a Hanover ground cherry over here, which makes me very excited because the kids love ground cherries, and I think they're gonna love coming out here to pick them. One thing I wish I would have done differently is start a ton more ground cherries. I have one Aunt Molly's ground cherry plant and one Hanover ground cherry plant. I might have started a few more, but only those two really made it. For the fall, I'm going to start many more because my kids are obsessed with them and I want them to be able to enjoy them. They're pretty much healthy little candy. And I like planting things that I know that they'll like so that I can get them involved in gardening, and hopefully one day they'll have gardens of their own. We have some more peas right there. And on this edge of the garden bed, I have a Don Juan climbing rose. There's one right here, but it's been on there for a little while now, and it still looks really beautiful. The leaves are very velvety. I actually bought this from Lowe's. I've seen them sold as bare roots and potted plants from David Austin, and had I known back then, I would have purchased it from them because I've had really good luck with the other rose that I bought from them. It's been very vigorous. With this rose, I feel like I had to wait a little bit, but at the same time, the saying goes, the first year they sleep, second year they creep, third year they leap. And it definitely slept for the first year. To be fair though, it has been transplanted a few times, and I finally settled on here. On this side of the garden bed, we have some squash along with a zinnia plant that definitely needs to come out now. I transplanted some melons and cucumbers to climb up these trellises, but a lot of them didn't make it, which I was expecting because for the most part, I like direct sowing those plants. I feel like they do a lot better, and I went ahead and direct sowed some more seeds a few days later, and they haven't popped up yet, but hopefully they do soon. We have some more basil starting to bolt, and then some volunteer sunflowers. I feel like volunteers are serendipitous. You come out one day and they've popped up out of nowhere. They've made it through harsh conditions. I mean, these have been growing through the winter. It also helps to have volunteers when you're like me and you forget to start some seeds for the pollinators. By the way, in between the pathways, I have all of these trellises and all of these hummingbirds to give the illusion that the garden is a lot bigger than it really is. Growing vertically helps to make the most of the space because I can't expand my garden outwards anymore. I can only go up, and trellises are the perfect way to do that. In this garden bed, I have a whole lot of greens. A ton of these, I don't even remember what they are, but they're doing great. I just have to look for the tags. There's a lot of kale, some broccoli, some peppers, some lettuce, and a grapevine along with some peas. One thing I wanted to show you guys is that down here, I actually raised my little irrigation setup with some rocks on the corners because I feel like that helps me see the water coming out. That way, as the mulch breaks down, it doesn't cover up any of the holes. I did that this morning and I've really been liking it. So this also shows me that I need to go through and add some more mulch. I'll show you guys how I do that because I like to shred it up in my mulcher. But for the most part, I really love using straw to mulch my garden to help insulate the soil. That way I don't have to waste as much water because I do live here in the desert. The soil will dry out within a day, sometimes even less than a day if it isn't protected. And mulch helps to do that. And as you can see here, a lot of it has already broken down, which is fine because it helps to feed the soil, but it also means that I have to reapply it. And we also have some strawberries there, which is really cool. Moving over to this portion of the garden, we have another grapevine. There's not a whole lot to see though. Hopefully by next month it'll start filling out, but for right now, it's still kind of bald. This garden bed houses some more sunflower seeds, which makes sense because a few months ago I had sunflowers all along this edge. I have a bunch of carrots, some nasturtiums, broccoli, lettuce, cabbage down there, and a bunch of peas. Currently, this is one of my favorite beds because look how full it looks. I love it when the garden looks like that. And in a few weeks, hopefully every single bed looks like this. In this next bed, we also have a lot of peas. These are actually going to come out. The ones down here, these were sweet peas. And there was one single bloom a few weeks ago and now it's gone. And there's been nothing else. These were definitely stunted. I believe I had transplanted them. I feel like they do a lot better when I direct sow them, but I'll do that next time. Next to that, I have some broccoli, which is headless. This one will actually come out soon, along with some cabbage. As you can see right there, that one looks really beautiful. I think cabbages are one of the most beautiful things to grow in your garden because they look like huge flowers. Next to that, I have some more volunteer sunflowers, some sugar snap peas. I believe that's Swiss chard. And then I have some more squash over here. And then on this side of the garden bed, I have another Don Juan climbing rose and some more sugar snap peas. I love the fact that the Don Juan climbing roses are starting to bloom a lot more. I think it's just gonna look so magical when the trellises are finally filled out completely with them. And in the last garden bed, we have another grapevine, which you can barely see because there's a bunch of peas right there. A lot of broccoli, some more peas, some bolting basil, lettuce for days. I love coming out here and harvesting lettuce from here. We have some kale, more basil. Over here, it's a little bit more bald, but I recently sowed some corn over there. Do I see some green? Hold on. Oh, is this corn starting to pop up? I think it is. I think it is. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I see another one right here. Oh, that's so cool. Because I have tomatoes over on that edge, I wanted to have a row of corn right here. That way it could help shield it from the southern sun exposure and give it a nicer microclimate because I don't want to put up shade cloth this year. We'll have to see. I might still have to, but I don't want to put up as much as I did last year because a lot of the plants are very heat tolerant, and I feel that by adding the shade cloth, they didn't produce as much as they could have. I still got some really good harvests, but I feel like the baskets would have been a lot fuller and they would have kept producing for longer had they had full sun. And that included things like corn, okra, roselle hibiscus, and even some tomatoes because the ones that were underneath the shade cloth did okay, but the ones that were a little bit more exposed to the light did amazing. They grew faster, they stayed around for longer, and then the ones that were in the shade cloth were just there. They produced here and there, but for the most part, they were sort of stunted, and I think they just required a little bit more sunlight. We have some nasturtiums, and then over on this side, I have some tomatoes that I transplanted a few weeks ago. And this beautiful serrano pepper. This one took a while to really settle in because when I first transplanted it, at one point it was dropping its leaves, it was really yellow, and I cut it way back because it was very lanky, and then it started bushing out like crazy. It has not gone to sleep. It's kept producing throughout the winter, and it's still producing, as you can see right here. This is one of my favorite plants in the entire garden because it's a lot more established. As for the tomatoes, this is what the trellises look like right now. And hopefully soon we'll see tomatoes going all the way to the top, just like the Tommy Toe variety. I need to hurry up because the sun is going down, but in this spot I have some Roseboro blackberries. I have them going up the stake to keep them a little bit more compact and not so crazy looking. They haven't produced anything so far, but I hope they do this year because last year they were bare roots. This year hopefully those canes give us a little bit of production. Next to it, I have a Santa Rosa plum, which hasn't fully woken up yet. The buds are starting to swell a little bit, but for the most part, there's not a lot of action going on. Underneath it, I have some potatoes that I planted a few weeks ago, and they're already popping through. Some of these bags are still empty because I want to transplant out some sweet potato slips. This one also has some potatoes, and then the rest of these are a little bit empty still. This one has some pumpkins, which are looking a little bit sad right now. I'll have to go in and fertilize. And some more potatoes. The reason I have black trash bags around these grow bags is to try and hold in a little bit more moisture. During the cooler months, these work amazing here in the desert, but during the hotter months, they just dry out far too quickly. I feel like I'm constantly watering them, I'm constantly feeding them, and all of that just gets washed away every single day because they don't hold onto moisture very well due to the fact that they're so breathable. But during the cooler months, they work amazing. That pot has dill and marigolds, but I plan to put something else in there, maybe some roselle hibiscus. This is my Florida Prince Peach. A few days ago, it was still pretty dormant. Since then, it has started waking up because we have some green growth going on here. And one bloom. There's just one right now, but I hope that soon we'll have the whole tree covered in blooms. Here I have some more rose sparrow blackberries. This is my Pakistan mulberry planted less than 2 weeks ago, I would say. And it looks beautiful. In the last vlog, you guys might have seen that I cut it back because I want to control its size since it is in a 25-gallon pot. These guys can grow huge here in Arizona, and I want to make sure that I can keep it nice and compact. If you do have the space to plant it in ground, this would be an awesome shade tree, and it provides some beautiful, delicious fruit. But in my case, I just want to keep it a lot smaller. We have some more marigolds and a pepper back there that I transplanted. This is an Anna apple. It has definitely woken up, but I don't see a whole lot of blooms. If you guys have apple trees, please let me know. Do they leaf out first and then start blooming? Because a lot of my other trees seem to be blooming before leafing out. It didn't try and bloom last year, but it was a bare root back then. So hopefully this year is a different story and we get some fruit from it, because I know my kids would love that. Every tree I try and plant here has to have a low chill requirement because we don't get a true winter here in the desert. And this one is perfect. Next to that I have a rose sparrow blackberry. And then back there where you see the little guys fighting is a Burbank plum. And it's blooming so beautifully. It has a few leaves starting to come through. I'm not gonna get too close just so I don't scare them away. I feel like they're gonna keep fighting though. They always crack me up. But the blooms look really pretty. They're this striking white. They look very delicate, and I cannot wait to see what the tree looks like once it actually fills out. You can tell by the trunk that it's a more mature tree, unlike the ones that I typically buy, which are the smallest tree I can find. So it's very near and dear to my heart because it was a gift from my sister. And this one has a higher chill hour requirement, but due to the altitude of my house, I feel like it'll do just fine here. Next to that I have some green tomatillos, which are flowery. Next to that I have some more tomatoes. I have this little challenge going on where I'm trying to grow plants inside of 3-gallon pots. I'm trying to grow things that you would usually plant into a 5+ gallon pot, but I'm trying to see if I can keep them happy in a smaller pot. Next to that I have some celery and some marigolds. I'm trying to blanch that celery, but I'm actually going to switch that out for some brown paper bags because I don't like how that looks, but it was the only thing I had on hand at the time. One thing I will point out is I feel like the tomatoes that I have planted in pots seem to be a lot happier than the ones I have in my garden beds, which I was not expecting, but I'm excited for it. Over here I have a desert gold peach. This one is not going to fruit this year. It actually had 2 blooms and I took them off, what was it, yesterday. This is also a low chill variety and is supposed to do really well here in the low desert, but it was just planted a few months ago, maybe even 1 month ago. So it's a new addition to the garden and I wanted to get nice and established before it starts fruiting. But this is one of the trees that I'm actually going to exfoliate across the wall. Down here we have some more eggplant and tomatoes, some more marigold, and this sun gold tomato that has made it through the winter and is still flowering. I've actually taken some cuttings from it that I'm trying to root to put in other places of the garden because I really love this variety. I have some more eggplant, and then this is a nopal that I bought from Food City and I tried propagating it and it looks really funny. It's not doing the best. I think it would be a lot happier in the ground, so I might go ahead and transplant it. But honestly, I only paid like less than 10 cents for it. So if it doesn't make it, it's not that big of a deal. Over here I have a Dorset golden apple tree and it looks beautiful. This is also going to be exfoliated against the wall. Over here we have an artichoke and a pepper plant, some more marigolds. This right here is a beautiful sun gold tomato that I started a few months ago. I wish I had started a lot more. I thought I had, but apparently I only have one that made it. I have a squash plant. And over here I have a pink variegated lemon tree. This one is a new addition, but it's been really happy here. It's starting to put on some really beautiful growth, and I wouldn't be surprised if it tried to fruit, but I'm not going to allow it to this year because it's so brand new. I really want it to become established. This is my son's dwarf Cavendish banana named Kiki, and it's doing great. It's still putting out new growth, but it has taken a hit because it's been so cold and I haven't covered it up. This is a ruby red grapefruit. Look at all of that growth. It looks beautiful, and I would say pretty much every single one of my citrus trees has blooms right now, or at least blooms that are about to open, as you can see right here. This one is an improved Meyer lemon tree, and it also is covered in clusters of blooms. So I'm very excited to see what the production looks like. This is a Cara Cara orange, and it also looks beautiful. For the longest time I thought I might have to go in and do some notching to help it branch out, but as you can see there, For the most part, the trees know exactly what to do. We just need to be patient. So I left it alone and waited to see what it would do. And I know that in the upcoming weeks, it's really going to explode with growth. This is a result of a few days of warm weather, because it gets warm and then it cools down again and it gets warm again. And I know once it has consistent warm weather, it's really going to take off and it's going to look even more beautiful. This is a blood orange and it's also putting on a lot of growth. I really hope to try and taste some fruit from this one this year, because I think the fruit on a blood orange is one of the most striking, especially when you cut into it. And the ones that I've bought from the store are always a little bit disappointing. They're never fully ripe, and I feel like you can really only experience that if you grow them yourself. This right here is a Valencia orange and it also looks beautiful. Even though it's small, it also has blooms. And next to it, I have another nopal that I propagated from Food City. And I noticed this morning that it's pushing out some new growth right there. Here's my peace rose. It also looks really pretty. The leaves are nice and glossy. It's been transplanted a few times and it's still hanging in there. This guy is a fighter. Eventually I'll place it into a bigger pot, but for right now it looks really happy. Sorry, it's getting kind of dark. Over here I have a Goldfinger banana that is still pushing out new growth and has several pups down here. I hope you can see them, but it hasn't fruited yet. And next to it, I have a Manzano banana, which has some damage on those top leaves, which I'm gonna cut back eventually just because I want it to look nice from the front of the house. That way the HOA does not get upset with me. But this banana is less than a year old and it's really productive. It has some fruit over there. I hope you can tell. I know it's kind of dark. I haven't taken off the bloom yet just because we've had really cool days and I don't want to risk losing any of the bananas. So I'm waiting for it to warm up a little bit more before I take off the bloom. And this one also has several pups down here. This is a lemon guava. It's doing beautiful. It bloomed for the longest time and I was gonna go in and take off all those blooms, but I've noticed that whenever I do that too fast, the trees just continue to bloom again and again. So I wanted to wait until it finished its bloom cycle, and only a few fruit seem to have taken, as you can see right there. So I might just take those off, but I'm not gonna lie, I am kind of tempted to leave maybe one or two. This tree is a new addition, but it really took off once it was planted in this pot. Next to that, I have a dragon fruit. This is a red variety. I don't know the specific type just because I bought it from Home Depot for around 15 bucks and it has done really well. When I bought it, it didn't have all this additional growth. It only had one, and that's what I always try and do. I always go for the smallest, cheapest plant, and then I just feed it and keep it happy, and eventually it'll pay off, but that way I can stretch my budget a little bit more. And it seems to be doing really great because look at all that growth. And the last little plant is an eggplant. There's so many plants, I feel like I'm forgetting some. But over here I have my James Galway rose, which has really started branching out, as you can see there. I haven't built the trellis for it yet, but I will soon. I have just been so busy I keep forgetting, but it looks gorgeous. For my raspberry plants, they're still doing great. I feel like they'll be happy even in this location, but if they're not, I can always move them. And over in this pot, I have my second avocado, which looks so beautiful. And this is actually a Mexicola Grande. So many people love the Mexicola variety, and usually it's very small, but this one is the larger size. I believe I read online that it's supposed to be 25% bigger. It has really thin skin. It has amazing tasting fruit. And it looks like it wants to flower, which I won't allow it to this year, but hopefully in the next few years we do get some fruit set. And that's February's garden tour. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry it got so dark. Hopefully next month I'll be a little bit more on top of the garden tour. That way we get a good view of everything. But I can't wait to see the garden evolve over the next year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.